let's look at the certification options offered by AWS. Of course, I assume everybody here today actually at least have one certification or in the process of preparing for it. But let's quickly go through this. The fundamental one is, of course, cloud practitioner, basically just fundamental knowledge about AWS. Then we have 3 associate certifications with 2 professional certifications available. And also we have 6 specialties. There are 3 certifications actually regarding the data side of AWS, which is the data analytics, database, and the machine learning. Traditionally, there was a AWS certification called the Certified Big Data Specialty. It was retired in early 2020. I actually was one of the first who passed this big data, one of the first in passing this big data specialty. But it covers everything about AWS data. But then it runs into problem because as the data service provided by AWS grows, both in the number of services and in the scenarios that it can handle, it's more apparent that you cannot cover enough topics in one certification. So AWS, ever since the big data specialty was released, has been aware of this issue and has been coming up looking for solutions, such as subject matter expert forums, discussion threads, discussion groups, special interest groups. I was in some of these activities, and you can really see that how AWS trying to improve the specialty and try to cover as many aspects as possible, while give you enough depth in the certification. However, in the end, I believe they finally decided it's better to split this big data specialty into 3 different ones. One is the machine learning specialty, which I believe it came out in 2019. And then in early 2020, they officially retired big data specialty and replaced it with 2 specialties. One is the data analytics specialty, and another is the database specialty. And the difference between these 2 specialties is that the database specialty focused more on, guess what, database services. So they are more focusing on the usage, the utilization of each individual AWS data services. Whereas the data analytics specialty focus on pick the right service or services and organize them together to resolve a particular challenge. So when you look at the questions of these 2 specialties, a database specialty question would be typically like, you have a certain database, certain questions regarding this database service. How would you resolve it? Or what will it do? Like, for example, RDS backup or Aurora database read replica. In the question itself, it's very clear that which database you are running into and what's the issue you are going to resolve. And you are tested on the knowledge of this particular service in this particular feature or characteristics. Whereas in the data analytics specialty, you are usually given a special scenario where business has this requirement, it needs to receive data or store data or put certain security on the data. And then you need to pick from different options which service or a group of services fits in this scenario, can resolve the issue. Or you are asked how to organize these services together. Like if you have a Kinesis stream, should you use Kinesis data analytics to receive it? Or should you use a Kinesis fire host to process it? Should you store that in S3 or in Redshift? If it's in the in S3, are you going to use Redshift Spectrum or are you going to use Athena? All these are scenario based. So even without prior knowledge of these two specialties, you can clearly distinguish which question belongs to which category. So let's look at some information about this two database specialty, and I'm providing some links that can be helpful. One is the AWS database specialty, where you have the exam page. And from the exam page, you can see there are two links. One is the download the exam guide. This is also the link that I provided here. That's the official exam guide. There's also a sample question. Of course, I'm not going to click that right now. I'm going to let you guys to do it yourself and look at the sample question at your own, at the best time for yourself. But this is the exam page, and this is also the exam guide PDF. All right. So this is the database specialty, and it focuses on design and operation of database services. Then we have the data analytics specialty, which focuses on the process of processing and utilizing data in different scenarios. The exam page is here. Again, it has the exam guide and the data sample questions. Again, I'm not going to click on the sample questions, and you should do that at your convenient time. And download the exam page is here. The exam guide page is here. And click on this. So right now we have the two exam page, and what's important to us most in this lecture, in this presentation, is the two PDF files of exam guide. Now let's look at the services that's involved in this. If you have already passed certain AWS specialty exam, you know that these questions are mostly about, if ultimately they test your knowledge on the AWS services in a particular area, subject area. And you can see that I'm circling here. You have a database subject area where you have all the databases that are provided by AWS. You also have a migration and transfer subject area where you have a group of seven different options. Remember, this can change at any time. AWS frequently add new services and sometimes remove old ones, and sometimes they will even move service from one subject area to subject matter area to another. But this is as of January 1st, 2021. This is what is showing up in their official website. And migration and transfer, the most relevant is the database migration service, and also AWS Snow family, which is basically the hardware way of migrating database from one place, usually on-premise, into AWS cloud. And then we have the data sync tool. So these are the three services that's most relevant to the database exam. And we also have this analytics subject matter area, where you have those familiar faces, familiar names like Athena, Redshift, EMR, and Kinesis and QuickSight. We will cover this briefly in like next 10 or 20 minutes. But basically, you can, as I said before, just now, AWS also moves services from one area to another. Redshift used to belong to database. And if I remember correctly, Redshift used to belong to database, and EMR used to belong to compute under EC2. You can see that what Amazon is trying to do, and I mention this because this gives us more insight into what Amazon is trying to do, not only to the certifications, but also to the whole framework of their services. They consider Redshift and EMR as the best way, as best fitting to the data analytics framework. And that's what you need to pay attention to by looking at this. You pretty much get an idea on the recommended design framework and architecture that AWS wants you to do. And this is also going to be what you will be tested in the specialty exams. So by looking at this, you have a good idea on what services are going to be tested. And you should also have an idea on why these services are categorized into each area. Other than these core AWS services, we also have some common services that will be tested in any specialty. And like AWS infrastructure, like what is a region and availability zone, the idea of the different networking like VPC, security group, VPN, direct connect, and the management such as CloudWatch, CloudTrail, CloudFormation, and config, and also security concepts of IAM, key management service, and secrets manager. It's assumed that you need to understand the basic concepts and the practices of all these services that I mentioned here. If you are not familiar with any of these, you should either go back to do some research on that, or better, take a associate level exam so that you are familiar with them. Because so what's going to happen in the exam question, in the exam is that you will see some of them popping up. Maybe one question in each exam for some of these questions, for some of these services. For example, I just happened to double click on CloudFormation. You may very well possibly run into a question that asks you how to automatically deploy your RDS, Aurora, or DynamoDB into a couple of new service, new accounts. And there will be options like you will manually do it yourself, you will write a Python code to deploy it, or using CloudFormation to do it. And is CloudFormation is the best? Well, or is that the correct answer? It depends on the question, on the scenario. But you definitely need to know what CloudFormation is, what it is capable of, so that you can make a decision whether this is the right answer or not. So this is for the common AWS services. And so far we talked about the whole special certification scenario and the services you will cover. Now let's look at the database specialty. I already bring up the exam guide, the exam page. It provides you with a lot of information that you can see, like recommended knowledge, ability validated, and something like a training. If you want to find a training in AWS training, something like this, right? Now, another important part, and probably most relevant to this presentation, is the exam guide PDF. If you have already passed one certifications, or if you are in the process of training for one certification, which I believe is the case for most of the audience today, you should be familiar with this PDF format. So every specialty, every AWS certifications comes up with this one exam guide PDF like this. It starts with introduction, and it tells you what this particular certification is about. For database specialty, it's about understanding and differentiating the key features of AWS data services and analyze needs and requirements to design and recommend appropriate database solutions using AWS services. And you should have a minimum of 5 years of experience with common databases and 2 years of hands-on experience working on AWS. And of course, you should have experience working with on-premise and AWS-based relational and NoSQL databases. And I believe the last one is actually the key to this exam, where you should have hands-on experience with AWS databases. Exam content, there are two types of questions: multiple choice, multiple response. And there's also something like exam results, how many points you need to score in order to get a pass rate. I'm not going to go through this, but the most important thing here we want to check is the domains in this exam. The first domain is the workload-specific database design. It says select appropriate database services for a special type of data and workloads. And then you will determine strategies for disaster recovery and high availability and design database solutions for performance, compliance, scalability, and compare the cost. Now, look at here. Only the first item, first entry, asks you to differentiate between different databases. So for the rest of the exam, it's all about particular database, but one or two particular database services. As you can see, this is one requires you to have some good knowledge of what each database services is about, what the scenario should this database used for, but the cross-service knowledge pretty much stops here. The rest of them is all about each individual database services. You will determine how disaster recovery and high availability is achieved in each different database services. You will design for performance, compliance, and scalability. Apparently, these all depends on the exact database services you pick. Then you will compare the cost. And then there's something called deployment and migration. This usually falls into this part, migration and transfer. And we are going to use a lot of database migration services and Snow family and data sync. You will automate solution deployment, and we mentioned the cloud formation just now. This is definitely one possibility that you can use. You will determine data preparation and migration strategy, and you can use different services, data migration services, and schema conversion tool for this purpose. You will finally execute and validate database data migration. You can use Snow families like Snowball or Snow Edge, or use database migration. But if you use database migration tool, then you need to understand the stability and the bandwidths of your connection, right? So you need to have a good understanding of a VPN or direct connect. These are like things like VPN or direct connect or cloud formation we are not going to see a question specifically asking you about these services. Rather, they will be combined with database questions or like database migration tool questions, especially here in deployment and migration. Now, once you finished deployment and migration of a database, you will do the management operation. And any database administrator knows what the management means. It means you need to maintain tasks and processes. You need to regularly back up, and always prepare for restore. You need to manage the operational environment. For example, operation system upgrade, and patch. All these things are the core of management, and you can see it differs from database services to database services. Each one has their own set of possibilities and the limitations. So these are the questions that you will encounter in the specific exam. You may be running into a question like, oh, I have RDS, and it's how do I make sure it can properly fail over in a certain amount of time? And then, as part of the database management, you also need to know the monitoring and the troubleshooting of each database services. And talking about monitoring, of course, the number one consideration you will have is CloudWatch. But how do you get or there's also database native logging. How you combine these two together, how you use other services. For example, use a SNS, a notification service, combined with a CloudWatch, so that when the database is done, you are going to receive a notification instead of wake up in the next morning and realize that the database has been down for 8 hours, right? And finally, of course, each and every AWS domain specialty will test you on security. How do you make sure your data is safely stored and moved? How do you make sure you can audit that the database service is properly functioning and no data breach? How do you determine who can access what and to enforce these policies? You will run into a lot of questions on IAM, roles, and the policies. Basically, this is how AWS controls access to their services, right? And eventually, and finally, you will recognize potential security vulnerabilities, which you can use like services like AWS Macy or Trusted Advisor or config. Again, these similar to CloudFormation or like a VPN. You are not going to get questions directly on them, but they will become a part of a database operation, right? So each may show up once or twice in the exam. So this is the database specialties exam guide. Let's take a look at percentage of services showing up. Now, I get this percentage by going through internet and reading through posts and people's feedback. So this is something that I come up myself. It's not official. There's nobody from AWS ever said this is the percentage that they are using, and this is probably will be different from what you are going to see in the exam. However, based on my understanding and discussion with people, I believe this is a relatively accurate estimate that can help you in understanding where you should put your effort in. The number one services is tested, of course, is RDS. And that's the non-Aurora part. You will create RDS instance for MySQL, for Postgres, for SQL Server, for Oracle. And how do you ensure the high availability? How do you ensure they are secured? How do you ensure they can be properly connected to? Are you going to use a security group? Are you going to use a database user? All these things about regular relational database operation inside AWS. This will covers about 40%. One thing to note that these questions, you don't always get a question, especially directly asking you about RDS. It's possible that they get combined with others. For example, RDS and Aurora are constantly placed together. For example, if you talk about RDS for MySQL, have a backup requirement. Can you use the Aurora to replace the RDS in order to achieve this requirement? So this requires you to know both RDS and Aurora. So when I add up, and this will count both in this percentage. So when you have multiple topics be covered in the same question, the total may be greater than 100%. That's when you add up all these, it will be more than 100%. And then the number two question service is 20% is Aurora. Then followed by DynamoDB, 15%. Then everything else, all the other databases in AWS get like anywhere between 2 to 5%. Redshift is also covered here. As I said, Redshift was in database, but then they move it to analytics. You are going to see some questions regarding Redshift, but mostly it's not going to be like Redshift usage or optimization, like a distribution key or something. Rather, it will just be straightforward, give you a scenario. You should know how Redshift should be used. It should be used as a data warehouse. It's not supposed to be a transactional database. It can run complex queries. It can use Redshift spectrum to query data in S3. But that's pretty much it. Don't expect too much deep down questions on Redshift. And as you can see, there's also DocumentDB, Neptune, ElastiCache. Till this day, we haven't seen any question on key spaces, but it's possible that you will run into them. But even if it comes up, it will be like 1 or 2 questions. Remember, the exam has 65 questions. So 2% basically means 1 question in the certification, in 1 certification exam. Then outside of these services, you will have a DMS, database management, database migration service, and SCT, schema conversion tool. Then you will also have CloudWatch for monitoring, and the CloudFormation secrets manager. Look here, this says 3%. Basically, it means you will get 1 or 2 questions in each exam, and possibly 2 or 3 questions for these two each. So this is how these specialties, the services are covered in each question, in each exam. Again, remember, this is something that I come up by counting on internet feedbacks, not something from AWS certification team, and it's not official, and it's probably will be different from what you are seeing in your own exam. But I think in a statistics sense, it's still pretty helpful. Then we just covered the services. How about subject matter area? You will have a 20% of security, which is actually covered here, talking about here. Database security, 18%. And you will have a backup and restoration. Backup and the restoration of different database services counts for 15%. Where you can see that backup and restore is in domain 3. Domain 3 counts for 18%, which means the majority of management is on backup and the restoration. Then you will have a scaling, automation, like auto scaling, like how you control performance. And then you have a replica and the cross AZ and the cross region. This is both for performance and for high availability. All these add up, and some kind of a monitoring. All this add up is less than 100% because there are other subject matters, but these are the key ones that you need to pay attention to. All right, so hope this gives you a good understanding of database specialty. Now let's talk about data analytics specialty. Data analytics specialty, again, we have the exam page and the exam guide PDF. It covers the analytics subject matter area, which you can see you have Athena, Redshift, EMR, Cloud Search. So I'm going to show you the services tested in the specialty first. In the question, as we said, a majority of the major difference between data analytics specialty and database specialty is that data analytics specialty frequently tests you on a scenario. It will give you a business scenario and ask you to come up with a solution by picking 1 or 2 services or combining services together. The most evident thing is you frequently see Athena and Glue and the QuickSight and S3 be put together in one question to form a solution. That's why when you add these up, they're actually more than 35. Because sometimes you have Athena plus Glue, sometimes you have Athena plus S3, sometimes you have a QuickSight plus Athena, and sometimes you have them all together. Individually, Athena takes about 15%, whereas the Redshift Spectrum takes 5%. And Glue, QuickSight, and S3 each is 10%. So when you study, you need to pay attention to the combined usage pattern of these services. Outside of these services, you also have Redshift 20% and the Kinesis 20%. Kinesis plus the management service for Kafka. These are streaming processes. Takes 20%. Then EMR, CloudWatch, 3%, which means you will run into 1 or 2 questions in each exam. And then, interesting about subject matter is that there are certain patterns. So here you can see the difference between data analytics specialty and the database specialty. When we talk about database specialty, we focus on individual operations, right? You can see that security, how to seal up a service, a box or a cluster. Backup, how to back up an instance and restore it. How you create a replica. But in the data analytics specialty, you are seeing how different services, you are questioned on how different services will be combined together. 20 to 25% are like, if the source is something and the destination is something, how you combine different services together to make sure the delivery is efficient, cost optimized, and on time. Like if the source is IoT and destination is S3, how are you going to move the data? Maybe you will have a Kinesis data stream feeding into a fire hose, and then you have a Lambda function to transform the data before it's written into S3. But if I'm asking S3, that means you will not be able to use Kinesis data analytics, because at the time of this presentation, Kinesis data analytics are not able to write directly into S3. So if you see a question asking you to write from IoT into S3, and you are seeing options, like Kinesis creating a Kinesis stream, but one option says use Kinesis Firehose. Another says use Kinesis data analytics. You need to know Kinesis analytics cannot write to S3. Thus, you have to choose the option with Firehose, Kinesis Firehose. So this is one common pattern. For each Kinesis service, you need to not only Kinesis service, but also some other services. You need to understand what source they support, what destination they support, and what can they do? How can they process? Like Kinesis, the Firehose can use a Lambda function to convert data, but the Kinesis stream itself, data stream itself, cannot transform data. You have to have some application on top of it. So these are the questions we will encounter, asking you to have a good understanding of the functionalities, capabilities of each service. And also, another frequently seen scenario is asking you to pick between batch jobs versus stream. If it's a stream, then it's a real-time or near real-time. For example, if you need a real-time processing, for a Kinesis stream, you need to use Kinesis API, because this directly writes data into the stream. But if you want to do a near real-time thing, then you can use a Kinesis producer library, a KPL, because KPL will somehow buffer the data a little bit in the range of 10 to 10 milliseconds, which means it's not real time, but it provides much stronger functionality, like failover. Right? If you are using a Kinesis API, if the API call failed, then it failed. You need to rewrite it yourself. But for Kinesis KPL, it can gracefully manage the failed record. So these are the things you need to consider. Shortcoming and capability of each services. And of course, our favorite topic of security, how do you ensure your data is protected? Your services is protected. IAM, don't forget IAM roles and different policies. And finally, some kind of a file and storage format. For example, what's the best way of storing a data for analytics? Usually it means it's a Parquet or ORC. But some services may not support Parquet. Like a QuickSight, I believe at the point at this point of time, January 2021, QuickSight cannot read Parquet file. Of course, with the speed of AWS refreshing their service, maybe by the time you take the exam, QuickSight already is able to support Parquet. But that's something that you need to pay attention to. So let's take a look at data analytics exam guide page, similar to what we have seen for a database specialty exam page. And let's go through the exam guide. It validates how you define data analytics services, understand how they integrate with each other. You see the difference between this one, integrated with each other, and the one with a database specialty, where you are asked to see the key features. In database specialty, you pick one against each other. In data analytics specialty, you pick one and all its related friends. Then you need to explain how these services fit into the data life cycle of collection, storage, processing, and the visualization. And similarly, this requirement is similar, where you have 5 years of experience overall and 2 years of AWS experience and hands-on with AWS Services to design, build, secure, and maintain analytics solutions. So there will be, I believe the question is, the exam is, for both exams, is 180 minutes. Each have 65 questions, 65 multiple choice or multiple response. You need to score 750 to pass both. And the maximum you can get is 1,000, but I don't think I have ever heard anybody getting 1,000, even not even myself. Okay, so what we're interested in, domains. Data collection, where data comes from. I do see there are two major sources that AWS is testing on. One is on-premise. There will be applications coming in. Another is streaming, that you will have producers, applications writing, sensors writing into your system, or at least it requires you to receive data, streaming data from outside sensors, from outside applications. And in recent years, I do see more emphasis is put on IoT and streaming. Combine these two together. So a little bit knowledge about IoT will be helpful too. And here you will be asked for the frequency, volume, and the source, and properties of data, like order or format or compression, right? That's what we mentioned when we talk about file and the formatting. Now, also you will have a storage and data management. Storage, fundamentally, there are two parts, the two services, S3 and the Redshift. You will determine the operation characteristics of it. You need to understand when you should store data in S3, when you should store data in Redshift. And if you store data in S3, is that possible for you to read in Redshift, or combine them eventually in QuickSight? You will need to determine data access and retrieval patterns. Is that frequently achieved? Should that be real-time? If it's a real-time dashboard, for example, what should you use? Should you still use a QuickSight, or you should use Kibana? You will select appropriate data layout and format, define data lifecycle, and determine appropriate system for cataloging data. And remember this, cataloging data and managing metadata. That in AWS's current data dictionary means glue, data catalog, and lake formation. Remember this. Currently, the recommended data cataloging service in AWS is a glue data catalog. You will definitely run into questions on glue data catalog and how it is used either from Athena or from EMR. Then how do you manage metadata? Either from glue or from Athena or from lake formation. How do you know which data is in which place? How do you know the characteristics of each data entry? Now, processing. Processing basically is either glue jobs or EMR, and there is a increased interest in glue processing. And sometimes you will, if the job is small, you may also see Lambda processing, especially when you are doing data transformation in the stream. In the stream, you use Lambda, which is usually triggered by the Kinesis service itself. If it's batch processing, either you use glue or you use EMR. You will determine appropriate data processing solution based on where it is and what's the requirement. Is it processing or real time? Is it batch processing or real time? How do you automate and operationalize a processing solution? And then we have analysis and visualization. How do you put data together? You can have Athena, you can have Spectrum. Then in the end, you will have QuickSight as a visualization tool. But QuickSight itself is more like a batch display. So you may run into one or two questions asking you for real-time display, in which, of course, Elasticsearch Kibana is the right answer. And finally, security. You need to select appropriate authentication authorization and apply data protection and encryption and the data governance and compliance. So much is the domains. I hope by going through this, you have an idea on what services should be covered and what is the appropriate service in each scenario. All right. So finally, let's talk about qualifications. Who should take this exam? There's no official requirement. When I say there's no official requirement, it does says you need to have this information, right? A minimum of 5 years experience, at least 2 years of AWS experience and hands-on. But these are like recommended. There's nothing stopping a fresh school graduate from taking the exam. However, it's better to have hands-on practice, hands-on experience, hands-on practice to get these qualifications. A very common question I encountered is, how about certifications? What certification should you have before you take these 2 exams? I will say, although it's required, I would say it will be helpful if you have at least 1 associate level certifications. I'm not saying you cannot pass it without an associate level certification, but in general, I would recommend you take associate certifications first, have a solid foundation, have a good understanding of AWS system before taking on these specialty exams. I even recommend you to pass a professional level certification before taking any specialty exams. Now, if you have 1 or 2 associate level certification and 1 professional level certification, you are definitely ready to take on these 2 specialties and all specialties basically. If this is the only specialty you want to take because you are a DBA or because you are a data analyst, that's fine. You can just go ahead and take it. But if I know a lot of people want to pass as many specialties as possible, in this case, I will definitely recommend you to take networking first and then followed by security. then followed by the other three the data-related specialty: database, data analytics, and machine learning. The reason is networking, security is some question. Networking and security are covered, are touched in each and every specialty. Either it's in machine learning or database specialty. If you have a prior knowledge of this, you're automatically getting some extra credits, extra points from the exam. And the understanding of networking and security will be also very helpful for you to understand how those services are implemented and can help you when you run into questions that you are not prepared. How do you study? I would say hands-on practice is the most important. You should create an instance of each service on your own and play with it. You should also read through each FAQ page of the services we mentioned, and it's better if you can read through developer guide and user guide. They are the official answer to every question, whether the question is in exam or in the real world. You should also read some AWS blog. AWS blog frequently provides you with some solutions that when they put different services together to resolve certain issue. These are the usage pattern of services and the combination of services that you will see in the exam, not only for data analytics, but also for all other specialty exams. So these two sources provide you with an overall picture and official answer on each and every question. On top of that, you should take the AWS practice exam for the specialty and read through internet blogs and Stack Overflow to see how to give you an understanding of the exam style and depth of questions. For example, you may already be familiar with Aurora. You may have been like creating backup and restorations every week or every month. But still, there could be key points that you are missing just by doing your daily job. But once you see the questions in the practice exam, you will have a good idea on what may pop up. What's the relative easiness of this exam? And by going through internet blogs, you will also see questions encountered by other people. Now, there are some like brand dump websites. I don't recommend you going through this because if you think about why you are taking this certification, you take a lot of time and you spend $300 going through each certification. This is a lot of investment. You want to make sure this investment is really will benefit your career, right? I understand if you are like freshman, you want to get the entry, you want to enter this cloud computing field. So you want to take a associate level degree. Maybe you want to check what the question is out there. This is understandable. But for professional level or specialty level, most likely when company require them, they are expecting you to have real experience and can start working for them right away. In that case, understand just by knowing the exam questions or answers will not help much. So I would suggest you to have hands-on experience and going through official guides, have a solid understanding of these topics before you take the exam. Now, of course, there are online courses. I personally, when I study, because like I said before, I work in the data field all my professional life, and have been working in AWS for 5+ years. Every day, my job is to work on database and data analytics. For daily, we use Redshift Aurora, DynamoDB, Glue, and EMR. So all these questions, and Athena. So all these questions I'm very familiar with. The first time I see the sample questions, I was able to score like 60% for both. So by that time, I know that I definitely have no problem in passing them. And within 1 month, I passed both. If you are not familiar with those, at least you should put your hands on practice, creating some service on your own, play with it, then you will have a very good chance of passing that. All right, so I think this so much is my advice and my thoughts on these two specialties, AWS data analytics and database specialty. Let me know if you have any questions.